Hey, good morning, Trondheim friends, and welcome to this week's episode of Patio Ponderings. This is episode 4 in our second season, and I'm so glad you decided to join me today. My patio today is on the beautiful shoreline of Lake Superior. Or am I out on a dock in a pond in Lonsdale? And does it matter? Now, before you think I've gone out of my mind a little bit, let me explain. So this is kind of the question, actually, that is tied into our story from Sunday. On Sunday, we heard about God freeing the Israelites from slavery in Egypt through the leadership of Moses, and they find themselves trapped on the shore of the sea with the full force of the Egyptian army bearing down on them. And they lose hope and think that their long-awaited freedom is all over. So I want to share with you a particular verse that I've been thinking about that is connected with this. And this comes from Exodus, of course, in the chapter immediately before our story on Sunday. Now, the NRSV translation has the verse like this. So God led the people by the roundabout way of the wilderness bordering the Red Sea. Now the CEB, the Common English Bible that we've been using quite often, in there the verse reads like this. So God led the people by the roundabout way of the Reed Sea Desert. So one translation says Red Sea. One translation says Reed Sea, which would mean that the place that the Israelites crossed this body of water is actually a freshwater lake just on the north end of the Red Sea. So, which is it? The Red Sea or the Reed Sea? It doesn't matter. So, this is not the only place in the Bible where we have some translation discrepancies. We have to remember that the original language of the Bible is Hebrew, some Aramaic, and Greek in the New Testament. But not only that, we have other places in Scripture where we have two tellings of the same story, and they're not the same tellings. So, for instance, the creation story is told in Genesis 1. It's also retold in an entirely different way in Genesis 2. In the next few weeks, as we continue this story of the Israelites leaving Egypt, we're going to be talking about the giving of the Ten Commandments. Now, there's one giving of the Ten Commandments in the book of Exodus, there's another in Deuteronomy, and they're different stories. And then, of course, we have 4 Gospels, all about Jesus. And so as I'm thinking about all of this and the translation issues and the differences that we see in the different stories of the Bible around the same events, it brings up the whole question that I get asked so often, especially by my confirmation students, is about the literal truth of the Bible. Is the Bible all factual history? And I think when you look at all these things, the human interventions, the different tellings of the same stories, the translation things, I don't think we can take it literally. So what do we do with that? How do we reconcile that perhaps it's not a literal telling of events, but we still need to trust that Scripture has a great deal of integrity, right? So how do we sort through all the things that we come across in Scripture that don't fit together neatly, that aren't resolved in translation? So the first thing I think we do need to remember is that the Bible is written in a language that is not our own. And so to put literal trust in an English translation, we probably can't do that. We lose a lot in translation. Words don't translate directly. We have issues where we have discrepancies. Is it the Red Sea or is it the Reed Sea? And in fact, it maybe is very likely the Reed Sea. We also lose all the literary devices and all the nuance of the original languages when we translate into English. So that's the first thing we need to keep in mind, and that we either need to study ourselves or go to trusted research by leading scholars to look at their thoughts about translation. The second thing we need to do when we're looking at Scripture and how we make sure that we let it have the integrity that it really does have is to consider the genre of whatever part of the Bible that we're reading. So we know that the Bible is not one long story by a single author, but rather it is a collection of books and writings by many, many, many authors. In fact, the book of Genesis likely has 5 different authors that have contributed to that book. And so we consider, what genre are we in? Because certainly there's parts of Scripture that are historical accounts, but there's also myth, there's also poetry, there's also prophecy, there's letters, there's apocalyptic writings, and all these different genres are written in different ways to tell the story with a specific purpose in mind. And so we need to bear in mind what exactly we are reading in Scripture. Third, I think it's helpful to think about fact versus truth. So if we're talking about whether the Israelites crossed the Red Sea or the Reed Sea, we might not know which of those is actual fact, but the truth remains the same, that God made a way for God's people when there seemed to be no way forward. That is the truth about who God is, and that's what we hang on to. And finally, and I think this is absolutely crucial, is to remember that Scripture is not what we worship. Scripture, as much as we consider it sacred, and it is sacred, it is God-inspired writing, what we worship, what we ultimately trust, is the person of Jesus and who Jesus is. And so if the interpretation of Scripture that we're coming up with is not consistent with the love, grace, and justice of who Jesus is, we might need to rethink that. So, Lake Superior, Pond in Lonsdale, Red Sea, Reed Sea, does it matter, and how? These are the things that we are pondering today. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day, and we'll see you on Sunday. Bye.